Hey, Hammy here. Back with part 2 of our first section of chapter 1 about science and the natural world. Okay, in this section we are going to focus on the scientific method and the steps that are involved. And you've probably studied this in other classes, but a quick review here. Okay, the 6 basic steps of the scientific method. Remember, this is the method, this is the way of knowing. That's how we defined science earlier. Okay, it usually starts with an observation. How do you make an observation? Most of us think observe our eyes, right? Seeing something. But a scientist, this can be hearing, taste, touch, or an extension of a sense, like sonar in the water to pick up dolphin and whale sounds, microscopes to see things that are really small, telescopes to see things way far out in space, so extensions of our senses. So let's say we're walking through the woods and we observe these cool moths over here, and we notice something, that they've got these big bright spots on them. Okay, that, number 2, second step, makes us ask a question. Why do these moths have these big bright dots on them? Is it just for pretty, or do they serve a purpose? Okay, so when we get back, or sometimes even in the woods, we might, form a hypothesis as to why these moths have spots. A hypothesis, you may have learned, is an educated guess. Okay, so we're going to make a guess as to why these butterflies have spots. Now notice it's an educated guess. So we're going to use what we already know about the animal kingdom, about moths, and prior scientific knowledge. We're going to probably go on Google, right? We're going to ask our phone or our computer. We're going to Google, why do moths have spots? And let's say in your research you find, some predators of moths are birds, and some predators of those birds are owls. And you come across these owl pictures and you're like, those spots on the moth wing look a lot like owl eyes. So you come up with a hypothesis that maybe the moths have these spots to look like owl eyes to scare away the birds that are their predators. Our next step then in the scientific method is to test our hypothesis. Okay, we don't just say, oh, yeah, I'm probably right. We need to prove other people. Other people will say, well, prove it. So we need to prove it. This is where we start to experiment. Okay, this is the fun part of science. We'll have another video here that will go into more detail about what experiments, the different types of things you need in an experiment. But we're going to make a prediction, usually in an if-then statement. If A occurs, then B will happen. So we make a prediction to run our experiment to see if that actually happens or not. So in our prediction that these eye spots on the moth wing will help keep away birds, if a moth has eye spots on its wings, then birds will avoid eating it. See, we made an if-then statement or a prediction. Okay, so we run an experiment and we gather evidence. Maybe we go out in the woods and we observe moths with eye spots and without eye spots, and we collect data, okay, of how many moths were eaten that had eye spots and how many moths were eaten that didn't have eye spots. And if the birds saw the eye spots, approached moths with eye spots, and then maybe flew away. So we're going to keep track of data as we experiment. The final step then, the final steps of the scientific method is to take that data and we're going to analyze it. Okay, we're going to make it into charts and graphs. Sometimes, you see that listed as a results step in some books. And we're going to look at that data and come up with our conclusion. Did the experiment we do, did our prediction, was it true or not? Did our evidence agree with the prediction? Okay, if it does, this helps support your hypothesis. Okay, does it prove your hypothesis? It never really will 100% prove it, because you can't gather every single type of evidence or influence that might be concerning those moths. But what you find may help support your hypothesis. Okay? If it does not support it, if birds came and ate those moths anyway, then you must look back at your hypothesis and maybe come up with a different reason for the spots, and to design another experiment, and you'd retest it. And so it just kind of keeps cycling until you get evidence that supports your hypothesis. When that happens, you want to communicate your results, the last step. You want to share it with other scientists. Okay? The other scientists will test your hypothesis, your methods, to make sure you didn't have any errors. Let's say you were standing in the woods while you were counting these birds and these moths, and maybe you were scaring away the birds. So it wasn't the eye spots that was scaring away the birds, it was you standing in the woods because you weren't hidden. So that they might say, well, that was a source of error, human error. So you have to redesign your experiment, retest it, and maybe sit in like a hunting blind or something like that. And so this sort of cycle kind of continues. It's a big goal, especially at the collegiate level, to get published in the journal of whatever you're studying, your field of study is. And you get a lot of credit that way, and as a professor and as grad students, you try to get published. That gives you a lot of clout in the scientific community, and it shows that you're good at what you do, and people that have lots of published, peer-reviewed, published articles are seen as very good scientists. We call them peer-reviewed because other scientists look at your methods and they scrutinize over everything you did, and they try to find error, and they repeat it and they retest it, and if it looks like what you did was very valid, then you might get published, and then it's put out to a bigger group of scientists that can then test and retest your experiment. And that's sort of how the scientific method works. So we start by seeing something or observing something, and it makes us ask a question, and then we try to figure out why, we test it, and then we share it with others.